So the Chevelle is going to get a T56 behind the big block, and I'm going to show you all the steps it takes to put one in and how to do it right without tearing up everything and taking out too much material. But I'm also going to show you a major problem I ran into and the reason why I'm going to have to do this video in two parts. Now, the T56 is a massive transmission, and it is not designed really to fit in these old A-body cars that were designed for a Power Glide or a Turbo 350 if you were lucky. You can see where somebody did a little bit of a hack job on the tunnel here where the shifter output when the TKO is in this car. But a couple of things to keep in mind when you're doing this. There is some area here that's a little lower. This area here is where the floor brace goes across, so you have to be careful not to cut into that because then you're going to have to do some difficult repair work. So it's a slow process here, and it's not complicated, but I'm going to show you how from the bottom side here what that T56 looks like. Now, looking underneath here, you can see some of the challenges to it. There's a lot of little pieces and components sticking out of here. There's 3 electrical connectors and a vent tube that's coming out of this thing. The electrical's the reverse lockout solenoid. There's a speedo pickup that is a sensor, and then there's a mechanical speedo pickup as well, which is kind of cool on these, especially if you have an older car that's got the mechanical speedo cable. And then the backup light sensor, I think, is one of them. But anyway, you can kind of see some of the issues that we have with this, with all the sensors that stick out, that vent tube, some other, little pieces that kind of stick off this thing, where the tail housing bolts on, where the front cover and the front side of the transmission, it's just wide. There's lots going on here. So we have to kind of address all this when we're cutting the tunnel out to make sure this fits up in here and sits at the proper level so the driveline angles out the back are correct. So I'll show you that as well here, but just want to show you the bottom side of this to show you what we have to work with on the top side to get it all to fit. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this, but the way I usually start to do this is with the shifter hole first. I will tape that off so I know what lines to cut on, and then I will cut out that very small section first for the shifter. That way I can get the transmission up, and then it's a little bit easier to determine where the other cuts need to be on the length of the transmission up by the firewall and then back by that floor brace. So this is just a very, very, some people think it's a little unnecessary to be this cautious, but again, I don't mind the welding and I don't mind the fabrication side of it, but what I do mind is it looking horrible, and I want this to be, look nice. I want it to be done well. This is, like I said, like I've told you in the past, this is my high school car, so I certainly want to take good care of it. So anyway, we're going to tape this off, and then we're going to cut out for the shifter hole. Now I use an air-powered cutoff wheel, and I happen to be a little bit of a disadvantage here. I have a very small compressor. It's only 33 gallons, so I struggle a little bit with it because it doesn't run air tools that well, but you can use whatever you want here, Sawzall, air nibbler, whatever it is you want, but I tend to use the air tool when I can, and this one is just a little bit of a fight with it. But all we're doing is just being very careful. You have to drop the transmission down, so if you had it up where you could get a good look to see what lines you're going to cut on, you have to lower the transmission back down or take it completely out. I have it attached to the big block, so it's literally just on a jack, and I can lower it and raise it, as I need to kind of check the clearance and see where we're at. But this is why I start with just cutting out the shifter hole, because everything else after this is going to be a lot easier to determine where the next cuts need to be, where the reliefs need to be. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see a preformed tunnel. That is a Tinman Specialties or Tinman. I can't remember the name of the actual brand. It was Tinman something or other. I'm going to try that on this one. I've never done it before. I usually just cut the top half of these tunnels out in one bigger piece, and then use that as kind of the top side, and then build down along the bottom. You can see a picture here from the El Camino when I did that video and did the T56 in it. Oh boy, about 4 or 5 years ago now, of how I did that. But this is just a little bit different way, and again, this just a different way of doing it. So I'm being a little bit more cautious here because I don't have that ability to just take off one big piece of material and then reuse it later on down the road. So anyway, like I said, this is just, we're just kind of cutting out just the shifter part, and then what I do is once all these cuts are made, then I will get back underneath it, jack the transmission up, and then we'll take a look at what our next cuts are going to look like. Now, once we get that cut out, we're going to jack the transmission back up, all the way up as far as we can take it. That way we can start to mark out where the other cuts need to be along the length of the tunnel. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. If you were doing this on a lift where you could get up underneath it, I've seen guys, and I've also done this before, where if you can get up underneath it easily, you can use a punch and a hammer, to mark from the bottom side, where you can physically get a good look at where the those electrical outputs are at, and all the other pieces that kind of stick out on this transmission, where they need to cut, from the top side at. This one, because I'm doing this in my garage with literally the car, just on some concrete blocks, to kind of keep it level. I'm just using the, eyeball down the center of the transmission. That's why we made the smaller cut with the shifter. That way I could kind of look down there, and then it's just a matter of, with a Sharpie kind of determining where those cuts need to be, or where those reference points are at. If you need to hit the tunnel with a little bit of sandpaper, like I have to do with this one because the Sharpie isn't really sticking on there very good, you can do that. But like I said, all you're really doing is kind of getting some reference points, trying to be as careful as you can so you're not taking off too much material, but just enough so you can start to slowly move the transmission up as far as it needs to go. And then it's just a matter of masking the thing off and building out your cut lines, double checking, and you're ready to make your next set of cuts. So again, it's a very slow process the way I'm doing this, but it's very, very careful. It's very, very, you're going to reduce the number of, fabrication and, additional cuts and, build up to the size of material that you cut out of here. So again, it's a very cautious way to do it, but it's also the very safe way to do it. And if you're not very good at welding, and you're going to, sheet metal screw this thing, your tunnel down to it and take it to somebody else to do the welding for you, you're kind of saving that person a lot of time, and you're saving yourself a little bit of money too. So anyway, we're going to start making the next cuts here. And we'll lower the transmission down one more time before we start making our cuts on this section. Again, this is not normal for me. I'm just used to making, some big dramatic cuts, getting some big pieces of material out after I get a rough shape of it. I kind of have done this before, so I know a little bit where I need to be. But again, a little bit safer way of doing it. And I think it's a little slower. I'm not sure I would ever do it this way again. I think I would probably do it the way I normally do it. But if you haven't ever done this before, this is a really, really good way of doing it. It's just a little bit more time and, a little bit more effort, but it's not near as bad as I guess it looks. The time that you will spend on it now, you'll save down the road, like I said, with not having to do any other additional fab work. So anyway, now that this section's out, we can get a good look down there and see where our next line of markings need to be for our next cuts on this transmission tunnel. And you can see how much material we've removed so far and kind of the steps we took to get there. Like I said, slow and easy is the way to do it on this one, and it's worked out well so far. And you can kind of also see here from the top side what the clearance looks like down looking from the transmission tunnel down and where some interruption is. So I still have a little bit of pieces that we need to move out of here, but for the most part, I think we're pretty close. Now, once we get the transmission cross member in and it's all settled in there under weight, now the really, really important part of this comes in, and that's seeing where your drive shaft angle is. And it's obvious here that we've got some problems. Now, we're at about a 4-degree up. Now, 4 degrees up doesn't sound like a lot, but here's the thing. Operating angles at each end of the drive shaft must be equal. So typically on a transmission, the output or the yoke is at a downward angle. The pinion on the drive shaft is at an upward angle. That causes the drive shaft to be parallel between the two. So if both ends of the drive shaft aren't equal, meaning those angles aren't equal, your output yoke will maintain a constant speed, but the input yoke of what you're driving, what that is connected to, in this case, the yoke in the transmission is connected to the U-joint in the drive shaft, they will turn at a different speed. That's where your problems occur. That's where people say, well, I dropped in a new transmission, I did an LS swap, whatever, and weird, I got these really weird vibrations. It's because the velocity of the two is not correct. So you got to make the center lines of the driven and the driving members of the system parallel, and it causes all the parts of the drive shaft and the yokes to turn at the same speed, and that's what we're shooting for, is when both front and rear yokes are operating at a constant velocity, you get good smooth operation, you don't run into any troubles. So like I said, the transmission's always at a downward angle, the rear pinion's always at an upward angle. Now this is where all the arguments start. How much down on the transmission? How to determine that? Is it horsepower? Is it a guess? Is it, on a leaf spring car, you do this, a coil spring car, you do that. How do you determine what the up angle is on the pinion yoke when it's changed? How to keep both those operating under load. I'm not going to get into any of that here. You can read thousands upon thousands of posts and stuff on the internet about it. I do it my own way, and I will tell you what it is. I typically go about 4 degrees down and about 2 to 3 up on the rear. Under load, that typically gets the drive shaft right. Now, the good news is with the rear pinion, I've got adjustable control arms on the rear. I can adjust that fairly easily. In this case, because I am at a 4 degrees up, I'm going to have to stop here because I'm going to either have to do two things. I'm going to either have to get a new transmission mount and see if it'll drop it down. I don't think I'm going to pull a full 8 degrees out of this thing with a shorter transmission mount. I'm going to order one anyway and give it a shot just to see what it looks like and see how much it corrects it. And I don't think it's going to be much, but more than likely I'm going to have to get rid of this cross member and go with a different one. So unfortunately, that means there's going to be a second video. I was kind of hoping all this would work together in this one, but hey, this is the first time I've ever done a big block in a T56, so the chances of there being a problem was fairly high. So we ran into one, no big deal. It is what it is. So I ordered the new transmission mount. I'll take a look at cross members and see how much lower I can get that, or if I can get some adjustability out of it, of how much down angle I can get in the transmission to get it where I want it. So anyway, I appreciate y'all watching. Unfortunately, like I said, I'm sorry I'm going to have to throw another video at you here, but I got some parts to order, some things to check, and then maybe a new cross member to order as well. So anyway, we'll check all that out in the next video. if you got something out of this video, please give it a thumbs up or even a thumbs down. It doesn't really matter. It just helps me out with YouTube and their funny algorithm that they have. So anyway, if you got any comments, please don't hesitate. Leave them down below, and subscribe and all that other monkey business. And we'll catch you guys on the next video. Thanks, guys. Bye.